concept of Christian belief is that God is not going to allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able. God is going to protect you from being compelled to sin. No matter what happens, God's always going to give you a way out. And this is in Philippians or Colossians, I think, that no matter what happens, God will give you a way of escape that you may be able to bear it. So if this was the only verse in here that taught that, I would not recommend that. But it's a very common, and you'll hear Christians talking about a lot. God delivered me from temptation and all this kind of stuff. So there's several verses in there that, aside from just kind of a basic idea of justice, that why can God punish you for sinning if you can't get away from it? But as a matter of fact, there was even one place in the Old Testament where God commanded somebody to do a bunch of killing. He didn't do as much killing as God wanted him to, and so He punished him for it. So, in fact, the whole idea of Hebrews is that I told you to kill all these Canaanites and you didn't do it, so I'm going to make them a thorn in your side and all this kind of stuff. So. This is not an isolated thing. I don't know exactly what the Greek says.
There's a lot of translation. I mean, when you go through so many languages, I mean, you both know that that's going to increase a lot of error.
Well, now the King James and every modern translation comes from the Greek. Now the manuscripts they had when they did the King James are not as good as the ones we have today. They weren't as old. They only had about 20 of them. We've got about 5,000 or 6,000.
We have a lot more independent scholars working.
So
the liquor is good, but the meat is rotten.
Yeah, the liquor is good, but the spirit is strong, but the flesh is weak.
Yeah.
That's a virus.
Okay. Anyway, apologies for not having that one in there, but I just realized it 3 or 4 days ago, and I just went, whoa. Any of you that are fishermen, I want to give out an important safety alert. Never ask God for fish. It could get you in a lot of trouble. Matthew 7, verse 9 through 11 says, "What man is there of you whom, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for fish, will give him a serpent? If ye then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more shall your Father, which is in heaven, give good things to them that ask Him?" Now, there actually was a case in the Old Testament where the Hebrews asked for fish. You look at Numbers 11, 4 and 5, and it says, "The Israelites wept again and said, Who shall give us flesh to eat?" They were wandering out in the wilderness. They were tired of eating manna. They were hungry. They were thirsty. It says, "Who will give us flesh to eat? We remember the fish which we did eat in Egypt freely," which is credible. The Nile River's right there. So God sent them quail to eat. While the flesh was yet between their teeth, before it was chewed, the wrath of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord smote the people with a very great plague. This was very poisonous quail. While the flesh was yet between their teeth, before it was chewed. As soon as that stuff hits their mouth, they start falling down. I don't know about you, but if I saw something like that happen to somebody else, I wouldn't be eating any quail. But anyway.
Was it kosher?
Good question. But the Israelites asked for fish, and God gave them poisoned quail. So, important safety tip: if any of you guys ever fall away from reason and get religious, go to church all you want, but don't ask God for fish. The next one I'd like to talk about is the Golden Rule. Now, the Golden Rule is actually one part of the Bible that I really like. Every major religion has a version of the Golden Rule, and the way that Jesus stated it was, "All things whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do even to them." That's very nice. I mean, and I don't mean that sarcastically or anything. That's really very good advice. That's been stated very different ways. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Treat others the way you like to be treated. The problem is, again, that Jesus and God just don't see eye to eye on this one. Acts of God, hurricanes, tornadoes, tsunamis, and earthquakes kill and horribly injure thousands of people every year. Now, how many of these people would really like to be killed or have all their families killed in a tidal wave or a tsunami or whatever? I don't think any of them. But all things whatsoever you would men do to you, doing to them, God's doing it to them, so God's not following His own advice. This is one of those "do as I say, not like I do" verses in the Bible. Okay? It gets worse. One way that you test out the golden rule is that you trade places with this person in imagination. You know, Blair and I are trying to work out some sort of a deal, and to ensure that we're both being treated fairly, Blair assumes he was me, I assume he was him, and we kind of look at it from the other person's point of view, and if we're happy with that, then it's probably fair. It's probably a nice thing to do. That's just kind of the golden rule in practice. Well, imagine you and Jesus traded places. Jesus was you, you were Jesus. Jesus was going bald. Yeah. I should have said that. Imagine you and Jesus trading places. You were Jesus and Jesus was you. Would Jesus want you to make him burn in hell forever just because he didn't believe in you? A literal interpretation of the Bible turns the golden rule into an enormous hypocrisy on God's part. And that's one thing that really gets me about a lot of these fundamentals. There's a lot of people who pick out the good and loving parts of the Bible, and they don't accept it all literally. They just kind of take the general things that, you know, you're supposed to care about people and that kind of thing. And they, you know, they're trying to make the world a better place. And I don't really have a big problem with these people. I don't like their theology, but, you know, we can work together. I do a lot of activism. I campaign for better funding for Medicaid and for constitutional reform and for landlord-tenant reform and, you know, tax reform and that kind of thing. And a lot of the groups that I work with are liberal Christian groups. But if you take the fundamentalist point of view and you interpret this thing literally, it turns one of the best parts of the Bible into an enormous hypocrisy on God's part. The next one I'd like to talk about is the Gergesene demoniacs. Now, Gergesene and Gadarene were kind of the same places. Jesus gets off of the boat. He's in this Gentile area of Gadarene or Gergesene. There's these two guys that are demon-possessed, and it says, the devils besought him, that is Jesus, if thou cast us out, suffer or allow us to go into the way of the herd of swine. And he said to them, go. And when they came out, they went into the herd of swine. Behold, the whole herd of swine ran violently down a steep place into the sea and perished in the waters. Luke 8:26, 36 through 36, and Mark 5:1 through 21 contradict this thing right away, because Matthew says there were two, Luke and Mark say there was one. Not that theologically significant, but very easy to prove. It gets worse. Proverbs 12:10 says, a righteous man regardeth the life of his deeds, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. Jesus was a righteous man, but he had absolutely no regard for the lives of these hundreds, maybe thousands of swine, because he knew that he put the demons in them. He's omniscient. He knows everything. If he says the demons dying to these guys, they're going to die. The golden rule: whatever things what the men did to you, you do even to them. This deprived the Gadarene and Gergesene people of an important source of protein and nutrition. And even though it was a primitive society, and you had to worry about trichinosis and all that kind of stuff, but certainly the nutritional benefits of all that pork, particularly in a protein-deprived ancient society, were substantial. Also deprived the swine herds of employment. But the most theologically significant thing that's going on here is how do you deal with demons? How do you deal with evil? Jesus cut a deal with these demons. In 2 Peter 2:4, that's not supposed to happen. It says, God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them in the chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. Jude, verse 6, Jude only has one chapter. The angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness until the judgment of the great day. Matthew 8:28 through 34 says, a large number of demons had definitely not been cast down into hell, nor were they reserved in everlasting chains. They were tormenting two men who lived in the Sea of Galilee. When Jesus had the opportunity to cast them into hell, they asked to be cast into the swine instead of into the deep, and Jesus granted their request. It gets worse, because later on Jesus said that, you know, he casts the demons out of people, but sometimes they come back. So the demons might even come back into the men that they've been cast out of. So in other parts of the Bible, you see God kind of taking a hard line on evil. In the book of Matthew, you see Jesus actually negotiating deals with evil, deals with demons. He didn't do what he said he would do, or what he said he did do.
Cop the plea.
What's that?
Cop the plea.
Cop the plea. Yeah, the plea bargain with the demons. I've got one last one, and I know y'all are really about ready for me to wrap it up. And this was posted on the website. I don't know if anybody tried to pick out. I posted Matthew 12:38 through 40 on the forum, and let you, as an exercise, try to find 3 contradictions in here. Then certain of the scribes and Pharisees answered, saying, Master, we would see a sign from thee. But he, that is Jesus, answered and said to them, An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall be no sign given to it, but the sign of the prophet Jonas, which is Jonah. For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. This passage contains 3 contradictions. Number 1, whales are not fish.